The flashbulbs were a blinding, disjointed strobe cutting through the heavy snowfall outside the hotel's glass doors, and the shouting had already escalated past professional questions into something closer to a siege. I stood near the brass revolving doors, my boots tracking wet snow across the marble, watching the press and 3 angry board members corner the woman I had been hired to protect digitally. Karter Garcia was backed against the concierge desk, her navy coat dusted with melting snow, her posture rigid as the men demanded her resignation over a data breach that had not been proven. 6 days earlier, Karter had appointed me temporary cybersecurity lead of the Garcia Family Trust's 6-week emergency response unit. On paper, that made us co-workers. In practice, she was the executive sponsor who had risked her spotless reputation to put a former juvenile offender inside the trust's most sensitive systems under a written, monitored incident response agreement. The breach involved the personal and financial records of 312 beneficiaries, retired employees, scholarship recipients, and families whose medical grants were administered through the trust. Their attorneys were preparing a class action complaint and an emergency request to freeze trust assets. If the court granted the freeze, a distressed sale clause in the trust's old credit agreement would allow Halcyon Capital to bid on 2 properties below market value: Garcia House, the community clinic Karter's grandmother had founded, and Harbor Row, the rental complex that funded the trust's scholarship endowment. David, the family's lead counsel for 20 years, had spent the previous month urging the board to accept Halcyon's rescue offer. Karter believed someone was manufacturing panic to force that sale. I had accepted the assignment because the trust needed an investigator who understood how attackers hid behind legitimate credentials, and because a clean, independently reviewed response could finally prove that my past did not define the work I did now. A reporter thrust a microphone close enough to brush Karter's scarf. My jaw tightened. I did not raise my voice when I crossed the lobby. I stopped 1 step short of the reporter and looked past him to Karter. "Do you want to answer them?" I asked, "or do you want me to clear a path to the elevator?" Her eyes met mine. For half a second, the noise seemed to recede. "Clear the path," she said. "Talia has the hearing schedule upstairs." I turned sideways rather than charging forward and opened a lane between the concierge desk and the security podium. Building security moved when I signaled. The reporter stepped back before our shoulders could meet. "The press area is outside the marked barrier." I said, "Security has already contacted the police regarding trespass. Questions can be submitted through the trust's communications office." Karter did not hide behind me. She came level with my shoulder, and we moved in tandem toward the secure elevators, while Talia Morgan, her assistant, and the only person in the lobby still holding 3 phones without dropping any, followed with 2 document cases. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing us inside a mahogany-paneled box that smelled faintly of industrial lemon cleaner and ozone. Talia exhaled first. "The hotel lost our second reservation when the conference wing closed. I have 1 secured room, 1 board hearing link, and 6 messages from David asking whether Karter intends to resign before breakfast." "Do not answer him," Karter said. "I had already promoted his messages to a folder called Absolutely Not," Talia replied. A tiny, one-sided smile caught near the faint scar beside Karter's lip, the one left by a 4th-grade bicycle accident she had once mentioned hating. The smile disappeared when she pressed the penthouse button twice before realizing it had already lit. The adrenaline had reached her hands. Talia noticed too, but she did not comment. She handed Karter a black keycard and looked at me. "Jonah Beck is waiting for your preservation notice. He says your authorization remains active through the hearing, but any decoy deployment requires written approval from him and Karter." "Understood." Talia stepped off on the business center floor to coordinate with outside counsel. Karter and I continued upward alone. The elevator chimed on the penthouse level. We stepped onto thick carpet while wind pressed a low, continuous note against the windows at the end of the hall. Karter swiped the black key card. The heavy door clicked open to reveal a large room with 1 singular king-sized bed dominating the center. A narrow sofa sat beneath the windows, too short for anyone above 5 feet 8, and a glass desk occupied the corner. I stopped in the doorway, my grip tightening on the handle of my Pelican case full of approved networking gear. "I'll take the sofa or the floor," I said. "When the roads reopen, Talia can move one of us. Until then, you can lock the bedroom side of the room divider if you want privacy." Karter walked past the bed and set her briefcase on the desk. "Neither of us is sleeping yet. We have 72 hours before plaintiff counsel files for the asset freeze." "That does not eliminate your right to sleep. It does postpone the argument." She took off her coat and hung it on the back of the desk chair. Beneath it, she wore the same charcoal suit she had worn at the morning beneficiary meeting. One sleeve was creased where she had gripped her own forearm through the press confrontation. I looked at the desk. A heavy iron hotel stapler sat beside the notepad. It was missing its bottom plate, leaving the spring exposed and slightly rusted. It looked like a piece of junk. I pressed it with my thumb. It clicked with heavy functional precision and drove a staple cleanly through 2 sheets of hotel stationery. Karter looked over. "That may be the first reliable system we've encountered today. It has no bottom plate. Neither does the trust, apparently." The line was dry enough that I almost missed the joke. I set my Pelican case beside the desk and opened the signed incident response authorization Jonah had sent. It defined the scope in plain language. I could access the trust's read-only forensic mirror, preserve cloud and VPN logs, deploy approved decoy documents, and prepare evidence for independent review. I could not alter production data or access unrelated beneficiary content. The hotel's wired connection was only transport. The evidence lived inside the trust's cloud tenant and immutable forensic mirror, not on the hotel network. I connected a hardware encrypted drive, verified the authorization number, and called Jonah. Recording this call for the incident file, he said, "Karter, do you confirm Evan remains authorized to preserve logs and analyze the active breach?" "I confirm. Any decoy or containment action beyond preservation requires your joint approval. Priya Sen will independently verify his collection tomorrow." Karter glanced at me. "We understand." I opened the mirror. UTC timestamps appeared beside authentication events, transfer approvals, device certificates, and the hash values of preserved log bundles. Each new export was copied into an immutable storage container and entered automatically into a manifest Jonah could review. "My old mentor used to say you did not fight the current. You found where it was already moving your way. We were not going to build a wall against every rumor. We were going to follow the existing flow of permissions, timestamps, and approvals until it returned to whoever had created it." Karter moved to the kitchenette and started the coffee maker. Her hands shook when she reached for a heavy ceramic mug. I stood, stopping a few feet behind her. "Can I steady you?" She looked back and nodded once. Only then did I place my palm flat between her shoulder blades. The contact lasted 2 seconds, long enough for the tremor in her fingers to ease. When she had the mug securely, I stepped away. "Thank you," she said. "You approved the intervention. That is an impressively unromantic way to describe not letting me drop hotel china. I was aiming for accuracy." She poured a second cup and placed it near my terminal before I sat down. No sugar. A small amount of milk. She had remembered how I took it from one late meeting 3 days earlier. The black monitor reflected my tired face. Online rumors were spreading rapidly, spearheaded by an anonymous account publishing exact timestamps of Karter's trust transfer approvals. Some posts mentioned a Cayman Islands vendor called Northmere Advisory, which had received 4 unusually large consulting payments during the previous quarter. Karter opened her legal files beside me. "Northmere was approved by David," she said. "He called it restructuring support for a possible liquidity event. Did anyone else have authority to approve those payments? Amounts over $200,000 required David's legal clearance, my signature, and 1 finance officer. My signature was attached digitally while I was in Geneva." "Was it your signature?" "It looked like mine. I disputed it when I came back. David said the finance officer had processed an authorized batch. I added Northmere to the evidence index without drawing a conclusion. A public corporate registry could establish who controlled the company. Internal records could establish who approved payments. Neither could prove where money ultimately went without lawful banking evidence." Karter read each disputed transfer authorization aloud while I matched it to VPN packet times and device sessions. She identified which approvals only David could grant. I linked those approvals to certificate records and archived emails. At 11:48 p.m., a red alert appeared across the forensic dashboard. Someone inside the Trust's production cloud had initiated a coordinated deletion of authentication logs associated with the breach window. I froze the mirror display and checked the preservation status. The existing records were safe, but the live source was being wiped. Karter. She was beside me before I finished saying her name. Someone is deleting production authentication logs. I said, the immutable copies remain intact. I can deploy the approved decoy access file and monitor who opens it, but that means placing a marked document inside the legal review directory. What does the file contain? A false internal schedule with no beneficiary data. It will be tagged and isolated. Anyone authorized for legitimate review will see a notice directing them to the official folder. Risk? The attacker may recognize it and stop, or they may open it and expose the endpoint they are using. Karter looked at the screen, then called Jonah on speaker. He listened, asked 3 questions about scope, and approved the deployment in writing. Karter read the authorization once before turning to me. Deploy it? I did. The terminal began filling with containment alerts and access requests. I did not go to war. That was how I would have described it at 17, when every system looked like a locked door daring me to prove I could open it. Now I followed procedure. I preserved the active session, isolated the decoy interaction, and placed blocks around the attacker's attempts to reach the remaining production logs. Every action received a UTC timestamp. Every export generated a cryptographic hash. Every copied record went to the immutable mirror. Karter sat beside me rather than returning to the bed. She compared transfer approvals against board minutes while I tracked the session path. For 4 hours, we worked from the same evidence index. She caught a mistake in my 17th entry. You listed the Northmere payment as March 14th, she said. The approval was entered March 14th in Geneva, but the trust system was still on New York time. The UTC date is March 15th. I checked the source event. She was right. I corrected the index and entered the change in the revision log. You saved opposing counsel an enjoyable 5 minutes, I said. I lived to disappoint them. At 1 in the morning, Talia sent up tomato soup, crackers, and 2 apples from the closed restaurant kitchen. The soup arrived in covered paper cups because she had refused to trust room service bowls during an active evidence collection. Karter placed the crackers beside my keyboard one at a time, far enough from the equipment to avoid crumbs. You need food, she said. So do you. I am eating. You have moved the same cracker 4 times. She looked down at it. It has been under review. I opened the packet and placed one on the legal pad between us. Approved. The quiet laugh that escaped her softened the room for a few seconds. By 2, the attacker had opened the decoy from a managed laptop assigned to David's office. That alone was not enough. Credentials could be stolen and devices could be compromised. Then the rest aligned. The session used David's registered hardware security key. It carried his managed device certificate. The MFA approval came from his enrolled phone within the same 42-second window. The endpoint had connected through the private network in his townhouse, an address already listed in the Trust's remote work registry. The authorization pattern matched the Northmere payments he alone had cleared. A public registry search showed that Northmere's controlling director was the same corporate services agent listed on Halcyon Capital's acquisition vehicle. We still did not have lawful evidence that David personally received money. What we had was enough to show that his credentials, devices, approvals, and location had been used to destroy records and support a company tied publicly to the buyer pressing for the distressed sale. I leaned back. My neck popped in the quiet room. Karter looked at the correlation chart and closed her laptop 1 careful inch at a time. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, leaving a pale oval in the condensation. I wanted to cross the room. I wanted to promise her I would ruin him. Instead, I remained behind the desk, The carpet between us stayed empty until she turned around on her own. David taught me how to read our first trust agreement, she said. He was at my father's funeral. He has had a key to Garcia House longer than I have. The wind shifted against the windows. What do you want to do next? I asked. Her voice remained composed, but one hand had closed around the curtain seam. We preserve everything. Then we prepare for the emergency board hearing. I can finish the hash manifest and chain of custody packet while you rest. No. She came back to the desk. We do it together. I know the authorization structure. You know the session evidence. I moved the legal files between us. For the next hour, Karter labeled each board resolution and payment approval, while I inserted the corresponding log reference, hash value, and device record. We built one packet, not two parallel arguments. The broken stapler sat near her elbow. When we reached the final index, Karter pressed it through the chain of custody cover sheet. The exposed spring compressed. The staple closed perfectly. Still working? She said. Missing a part does not make the output unreliable. Do not become sentimental about office equipment. It has maintained a stronger control environment than most of your board. That time, she laughed without trying to hide it. At 4, Jonah arrived with Priya Sen, the independent forensic examiner retained by the trust's insurer. Talia followed with fresh coffee and a garment bag for Karter. Priya took custody of the encrypted drive, verified the hashes against the immutable mirror, and reviewed my written authorization, collection notes, decoy approval, and revision history. She asked me to explain every step without using the phrase obviously. I failed once. She made me explain it again. By sunrise, she signed a preliminary validation stating that the evidence had been collected within scope and that the source records had not been altered by my process. This is not a conclusion about David's intent, Priya said. It confirms the sessions, devices, authorizations, and preservation method. That is exactly what we need, Karter replied. Priya looked at me. Your chain of custody is cleaner than several reports I have received from licensed firms. The comment landed harder than praise from Karter could have, because Priya had no reason to protect my feelings. Talia pointed toward the sofa. You have 45 minutes before the car leaves. Karter looked at me. Sleep. I can review. That was not an executive order. It was a request from the coworker who just watched you explain a hash manifest 4 times. Priya corrected her. 5. Karter's one-sided smile returned. I took the sofa. The emergency hearing convened the next afternoon in the trust's downtown boardroom. Snow still clung to the ledges outside, turning the city light flat and white. Helena Ruiz, the independent board chair, sat at the center of the table. David occupied the seat to her right, perfectly dressed and carrying the calm expression of a man accustomed to writing the rules after other people had broken them. Talia distributed the evidence packets. Jonah sat beside Priya as outside incident response counsel. Karter and I took seats opposite David. Helena opened the meeting. This hearing concerns preservation of trust records, suspension of access, and temporary governance measures pending independent review. It does not determine criminal liability or resolve the beneficiary claims. David began before she finished the procedural statement. He described the breach as the inevitable consequence of Karter's reckless modernization program. He warned that the asset freeze would destroy beneficiary services. Then, he shifted toward me. The board should understand that Ms. Garcia's investigator has a juvenile conviction for network intrusion, he said. This so-called expert is a convicted hacker with every incentive to manufacture a dramatic result. I did not defend myself. Before I could touch the microphone, Karter stood and placed her folder on the table. Evan Nelson was appointed under a written 6-week incident response contract approved by this board's independent chair and outside counsel, she said. His access was limited, monitored, and preserved. Priya Sen independently verified his collection process. His past is disclosed in the same packet David received before this meeting. David opened his mouth. Karter continued. My decision to hire him is mine to defend. His evidence will stand or fail on method, not insinuation. He is the only person in this investigation who documented every action before anyone asked him to. Helena looked toward Priya. Do you confirm that? I do, Priya said. The hashes matched the immutable mirror. The decoy was authorized. The production evidence was not altered through Mr. Nelson's process. Karter remained standing. I moved that David's access be revoked immediately, that his trust laptop, security key, badge, and company files be preserved, and that he be suspended from all advisory duties pending the independent investigation. Helena asked for a second. 2 board members raised their hands. Only then did Karter sit. I connected the encrypted drive to the presentation system. The board did not need a performance. It needed a path anyone in the room could follow. David had expected us to fight his accusation. Instead, we followed the current he had created. I began with the deletion attempt, then moved backward through the session certificate, the registered hardware key, the MFA approval, the enrolled phone, the managed endpoint, and the network location. Priya confirmed each forensic reference. Karter explained which transfer approvals required David's authority. Jonah introduced the public corporate registry linking Northmere's controlling agent to Halcyon's acquisition vehicle. I did not claim David had received money. I showed that his approved vendor, his devices, and his access pattern sat at the center of both the disputed payments and the attempted evidence destruction. The room grew quieter with every page. David stared at the screen. Those devices could have been compromised. They could have, Priya said. That is why the board is preserving them for examination rather than treating a credential alone as proof. Helena called security. David reached for his briefcase. You may remove personal property under supervision, Helena said. The laptop, badge, hardware key, and trust documents remain. For the first time, his expression broke. Security collected the devices and sealed them in evidence bags while Talia recorded the serial numbers. Jonah issued a litigation hold notice before David left the room. No one offered him the relief of an argument. The board approved Karter's motion and appointed Helena interim legal liaison until new counsel could be retained. David walked out carrying only his coat and phone. The beneficiary lawsuit did not disappear by noon. 2 days later, plaintiff counsel filed the anticipated request for an asset freeze. Jonah submitted the preservation record, Priya's preliminary findings, and the board's suspension order. The court set an accelerated schedule, but declined to freeze Garcia House or Harbor Row before the independent review was complete. The first pressure point held. At the end of the hearing, Karter and I returned to the hotel to collect our things. The storm had weakened, and Talia had secured separate rooms for anyone remaining overnight. I packed my cables into the Pelican case. My chest felt hollow now that the immediate task had narrowed into legal schedules and examiner reports. Karter stood beside the desk, holding the black key card. The broken stapler remained near the evidence index. My temporary appointment ends at 6 tonight, I said. Jonah has the preservation copy. Priya has the examiner drive. Talia sent written confirmation that my invoice is approved. I know. I can remain available through outside counsel, but I no longer report through you. I know that too. I closed the Pelican case. She looked toward the singular bed, then back at me. There was no invitation in the room that depended on a storm, a contract, or a locked door. The hallway was open, separate rooms were available, my payment had been approved. I could leave without costing either of us anything professional. Karter placed the key card on the desk. This has nothing to do with whether you work for the trust again, she said. It will not affect your payment, your reference, or Priya's review. You can say no and walk out that door. I released the handle of my case. She drew one breath, then met my eyes. Tonight, don't call me your coworker just yet. The exact wording made me glance at the clock. My appointment ended 4 minutes ago. I reviewed the timing carefully. That is reassuring. Her smile caught near the scar beside her lip. I stayed long enough to finish the cold coffee with her by the window. Nothing else happened. We talked about the next filing, Talia's refusal to trust room service bowls, and the first computer I had dismantled without permission when I was 12. When I finally left for the separate room across the hall, Karter stood in the doorway holding the broken stapler. Hotel property, I reminded her. I intend to negotiate. By the second week, the case had become less dramatic and more difficult. Priya's team examined David's preserved laptop and confirmed that the deletion script had been launched locally through his managed profile. The hardware key had not been cloned. His phone contained the matching MFA approvals. The examiner also found draft acquisition schedules from Halcyon and communications about triggering the distressed sale clause after an asset freeze. Jonah disclosed the findings to plaintiff counsel and the trust's insurer. Plaintiff counsel agreed to pause the injunction request while affected beneficiaries received verified notice, identity protection services, and an independent account review. Karter insisted that the trust pay for those protections before discussing reputation. "We failed to prevent their information from becoming leverage," she told the board. "Even if David caused it, the beneficiaries should not finance our lesson." Helena supported the expenditure. The board approved it unanimously. I remained on the response team through Priya's firm rather than reporting to Karter. That separation mattered. She could challenge my conclusions without controlling my employment, and I could disagree with her without wondering whether it would cost me the next invoice. Our workdays moved between Priya's lab, the trust offices, and short walks through streets still edged with gray snow. The snowy street stroll Talia called our mandatory human reboot began after she discovered that Karter and I had eaten lunch at our desks for 3 consecutive days. She sent us outside with 2 paper cups and instructions not to discuss litigation until we reached the next block. Karter lasted half a block. "The Northmere invoices," Talia specified the next block. "You are enforcing my assistant's authority? She controls the coffee." Karter looked at her cup, a formidable institution. At the corner, a delivery truck sent slush toward the curb. Karter caught my sleeve and pulled me back before it reached my shoes. "Consent before rescue," I said. "You may file a complaint. I need the correct form. I'll ask Talia." The exchange was ridiculous and small, exactly the kind of thing I had stopped expecting from work years earlier. At week 4, Priya issued the final forensic report. It confirmed the breach path, the deletion attempt, and the use of David's devices. It did not claim more than the evidence could support. Her report also included an appendix evaluating my work. The collection had remained within authorization. The chain of custody was complete. The decoy deployment had been approved and proportionate. My juvenile record was acknowledged, but so were 12 years without a repeat offense and 6 years of supervised defensive security work. Helena read the appendix during the board session. "The trust will not pretend Mr. Nelson's past does not exist," she said. "It will state publicly that his work in this matter met independent professional standards." The board approved a formal statement and added Priya's firm, including me as an approved subcontractor, to its ethical security panel. The decision did not erase anything. It gave the present record its proper weight. The court reviewed Priya's report the following week and denied the request to freeze the trust's operating assets. Plaintiff counsel entered a corrective settlement framework requiring beneficiary protections, independent security oversight, and regular reporting. Because Garcia House and Harbor Row were no longer exposed to an emergency freeze, Halcyon could not trigger the distressed sale clause. David's suspension became permanent. The insurer and authorities continued their review. He did not return to the boardroom, and Karter never asked him for an apology. At the final board vote in week 6, Helena presented the governance plan. Karter would remain head of the trust, but legal authority would no longer be concentrated in one longtime family advisor. Major vendor payments would require independent compliance review. Cyber incidents would report simultaneously to the board chair and outside counsel. Karter voted for every restriction on her own office. That was the part that persuaded the final holdout. The board approved the plan, preserved control of Garcia House and Harbor Row, and rejected Halcyon's acquisition proposal. 6 weeks after the night at the hotel, the city had begun to warm. Snow survived only in dirty ridges beneath shaded buildings. The Garcia Trust's annual charity gala filled a restored ballroom with donors, beneficiary representatives, and more cameras than I preferred. This time, the press stood behind a marked line. Talia met me at the entrance. "You are late by 43 seconds. I was cleared by an independent examiner. Not for punctuality. She adjusted my event badge and sent me toward the ballroom. Karter stood near the stage in a dark blue dress, speaking with a family whose daughter had received a trust scholarship. Garcia House's clinic director was there. So were several Harbor Road tenants who had agreed to join the new beneficiary advisory committee. The trust's survival no longer existed as an abstract family legacy. It had faces in the room. After Helena announced the final governance vote, Karter stepped to the microphone. She thanked Priya, Jonah, Talia, the beneficiary representatives, and the staff who had maintained services during the investigation. Then she looked toward me. Evan Nelson joined this trust under an emergency appointment. She said, his work was independently verified, and his insistence on documented truth protected both our beneficiaries and our institution. The applause made me uncomfortable. I stayed where I was. Karter did not call me onto the stage. She finished her remarks, stepped down, and came to me instead. This is Evan, she told the small group beside us. He is my partner. Not contractor, not investigator, not a secret. My professional role had already been named separately and publicly. The personal word did not have to carry both meanings. We moved to a private table near the edge of the ballroom, away from the cameras. I reached into my jacket and placed the broken hotel stapler between us. Karter stared at it. You stole hotel property. Talia negotiated its release in exchange for a replacement stapler with all components present. I knew I hired her for a reason. 2 gala programs lay on the table. Karter aligned them and pressed the stapler. The exposed spring compressed. 1 clean staple held the pages together. She did not turn it over to hide the missing plate. Still functional, she said. Visible damage does not invalidate reliable work. Careful, that sounded almost sentimental. I have independent documentation to the contrary. Her hand settled naturally against my arm. For 6 weeks, I'd followed currents created by other people, permissions, lies, fear, and money, until they led back to their source. Standing beside Karter, I understood the metaphor differently. I was not searching for a current to escape through. She had chosen the same direction, and we were walking it together. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. A person's past should be weighed honestly, but it should not erase the evidence of who they choose to be now. Would you have trusted Evan's documented work despite his juvenile record? Green flag. Healthy support gives both people more agency. Karter protects Evan without controlling his career, while Evan asks before stepping in and builds safety through transparent, accountable actions rather than secrecy or leverage. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.